Word up, peepa deeps. Listen here. So I'm gonna discuss something very quickly. I know I don't discuss anything very quickly, but that is my goal. So I've been working on book 3, and yes, this is book 3, but I've never published this book, but I did finish it back in 2018, I think, and printed up a few copies, which are now printed copies of a finished manuscript, but not the finished book. So I have been, starting last year at some point, I mentioned it to you fellows and gals last year when I was, when I got to that point, that I was working on book 3, that I'd done what I could do with the first 2 books, and they weren't published. But anyway, all of that is irrelevant. Too much information, too wandering of a focus. Actually, it was getting there. I was about to start wandering. My focus was about to start wandering. Anyway, there are a few things that I've learned while working on this book. So I am essentially, let me see, I made it through. So I have about 9 more chapters left to edit, give or take. I've edited about 30 so far, I think. So I'm definitely in the final stages of editing this manuscript, the first manuscript. All right, so if you may be curious, if I had the book finished, quote unquote finished, back in 2018, why am I rewriting it now? Back in 2001-ish, when I had the dream that led to me writing the Scarecrow Hunters, for at least a decade, I had written it as recording it as a recording in a dream journal, to a short story, to a different short story, to a novella, to an edited novella, to a full-length novel, that when I sent it to my editor became 2 novels. So by the time I started working on this in 2017, there was a solid 10 years that had already gone into various writings of the Scarecrow Hunters. And I've said this before, that manuscript felt very much to me as if it were a casserole. So think about if you have some roasted veggies that you cooked for one thing, and you've got some chicken or something, fried chicken or whatever, and you have maybe some macaroni and cheese or whatever, and you have these leftovers in your refrigerator. Well, you pull the meat off the chicken and you mix it with the leftover macaroni and the vegetables, and maybe add you some more cheese in there, maybe a can of cream of mushroom soup or whatever the fuck you got in your cabinet. And before you know it, you've got a casserole that is at the very least edible, and it's using up your leftovers. It may not be like a work of art. It may not be a culinary awakening. It may not start the revolution, but it's going to be food and you can eat it, right? That was what the Scarecrow Hunters was in 2017 when I started writing Bones. It had been rehashed and rewarmed and different elements added in. But first of all, the structure, the way the book was written didn't work. And it was just this messy thing. So when I started writing The Singing Bones, which at that time was book 2, now it's book 3, because book 1 became books 1 and 2. I started writing this book with a very, very thorough outline. The outline was probably 15 or 16 pages long, maybe up to 20 pages. I'm not exactly sure. I actually still have it. But it was a thorough outline. It was not, bare bones. It was not just the high points. I mean, I detailed each scene and what I wanted to happen in each scene. Still, there's a lot of discovery when the writing process actually happens. So I'm still learning a lot and discovering characters like Pedora, I did have that character, but I'm not even sure if I had named her when I had the outline. But I fell in love with that character. I loved her so much, and there was a reason why I needed her character in the beginning of that story, and I knew that I needed her, but I did not know how much I would fall in love with Pedora. Like, I love Pedora, but not in a dirty way. Love is love. It's not dirty, but not in a sexual way. So anyway, the point is not to talk too much about why I did what I did, but I will say this. When I finished writing Bones and writing it from a fresh perspective, it wasn't rehashed. It wasn't old material that I was reshaping and trying to do things with. It was just a new story, a new character, and a new journey. And it was so much fun to write, just start to finish. So much fun to write. There were a few points that got tricky and bogged me down, but the hardest parts always are our timeline, like ages and what's happening and what seasons are and how long it takes, especially with people who are traveling, knowing how long it takes to get from point A to point B. You have to have a map, and you have to it's horrible. So there's a lot of that went into writing the book that would bog me down, and I would get kind of waylaid from time to time because it would be just sensory overload trying to figure all that shit out. But after I wrote the entire first draft of the book, and had edited that manuscript, edited that draft, I realized that my writing was so much better than it was when I wrote the Scarecrow Hunters that I needed to go back and edit the Scarecrow Hunters. So I went back and did a complete edit of the Scarecrow Hunters. It was still one book. And still, I knew that there were issues with it, with the construction, the way the story, it was told in a very linear format, and meaning it started when Elliot was 6 years old, and it went until he was in his 20s, like just chronologically. And it didn't work very well from a construction standpoint. And from other standpoints, just the way it was constructed, the way the flow, it was off. I knew there were problems. I just could not figure out what to do with it. That was the brilliant thing about hiring an editor. The first thing she said was, this is not one book, it's two. You need to split it right in the middle. The first book should focus on Elliot completing his Koloss. The second book is everything that happens to Elliot after his Koloss. The other two main points that she had was that I really needed to focus on picking a point of view and sticking with that point of view for each section, and because I would jump around. And the second thing was I needed to learn the balance between showing versus telling, because I told a lot, I didn't show enough. So as I've been working through The Singing Bones, I knew that The Singing Bones was the catalyst that led me back to having the first book edited, which led to a complete rewrite of that book into two separate books. Like, I completely rewrote both of them. There are elements that still exist in the Scarecrow Hunters in particular that carry over from that original version. But every word has been touched by me multiple times. And A Greedy Shadow has a few scenes that were at least there in some form. But A Greedy Shadow in particular was a fresh, brand new story when I came back to it the second time in 2020. So I knew that my writing style with Bones had made it so that I couldn't publish the first book. And I had to rewrite the first book and then the second book to bring them up to par with the third book. Well, I knew that when I came into editing the third book that I have grown as a writer significantly since 2018, when I finished writing this manuscript. In the last 3 years, I've improved as a writer, and I can see that very clearly. So the first half of The Singing Bones was tough. I would get bogged down a lot because it was better than the original Scarecrow Hunters, but it was still nowhere close to being on a par with the Scarecrow Hunters that you can buy on Amazon right now, or Greedy Shadow. But the differences, the things that made it not quite as good, weren't terribly obvious to me, because the story was very, very personal, because I wrote it. So what I wanted to do today, I am almost 12 minutes into this video and I'm only now saying fudge and crackers. So here are some things that I've noticed that as I've improved these areas, it has elevated my writing. There are some telltale signs of amateur writing that I still see in my writing style. I will tell you that I'm going to say a few things that I think distinguishes an amateur writer from a seasoned writer or a practiced writer. But I'm not telling you that these are the things that separate an amateur writer from a professional author. I'll tell you what I think separates a professional author from someone who writes for fun. And that is having your books edited properly and formatted properly. I would say that is the biggest distinction that makes a professional author, besides the fact that they're selling books. But any Joe Blow can sell a book on Amazon. So what makes a pro a pro? The fact that their books have been properly edited, professionally edited, and professionally formatted. Not having your books professionally edited and professionally formatted will absolutely undermine the professionalism of your book. Does not matter how well it's written, it will still undermine the professionalism of it. So to me, you can be a seasoned, experienced, established, and good writer and still not have the level of professionalism that you really want if you're not having your books professionally edited and properly formatted. And lucky, those things do cost money, but lucky for us, they are accessible. I mean, you may have to save up, but you can save up. It's not impossible. I'm being a nosy neighbor right now. Who daddy is. All right. But now I want to tell you a few things. This is not an exhaustive list, obviously, but these are some things that I've noticed about myself that separate me, the amateur writer that I was in 2017, from the more seasoned writer that I am today in 2022. So there's just a handful of things. I'm going to say these very quickly. One, because I'm annoyed by cameras right now, camera equipment, and myself, and I'm tired of talking. One is, the first two I will say are combined, or they're not combined. But they're similar. One is not having a mastery of the mechanics of writing. So grammar, punctuation, things like that. And related to this, but it's such a big issue that I'm including it separately, is mangled tenses. Having your tenses all mangled up, or using a clumsy tense that makes the writing weird or awkward. All of those things can lead to really amateurish writing. I used to teach a creative writing class in a high school, or for high school students. It was at a youth home, and they can have really clever, inventive, creative ideas and things, but they didn't necessarily have the skills with the raw elements of language, literature, English, to execute well on it. So things like proper grammar and punctuation, honestly, it's practice. You just have to practice them and you'll get better at them. Another thing is trying some clever thing, but not really having mastery over it. Really, it all boils down to not having mastery over the craft, over the skill, the skills you're trying to use, whether it's language, word choice, punctuation, grammar, some kind of clever writing technique or gimmick, like the surprise ending or a twist ending. That's very popular. I'm not particularly a big fan of twist endings, or twists in general. In fact, one person that was helping me with the books, they read the first book and they were like, I was thrown by the twist in the book. And I didn't realize there was a twist until he described it for me, because it wasn't, in my mind, it wasn't a twist. It was just the truth of the story. I'm not going to tell you what it was, because obviously it would be a spoiler. But let's say that you want to use a twist and you try to incorporate a twist ending or a twist something in your book. The goal is when you write that twist in, the reader to go, okay, wow. And they think about it for a second and they're like, yeah, I guess I saw that. I should have seen that coming. Oh my goodness. Totally believable, but still astounded, right? But what typically happens, I would say, is either it comes out of the blue and it's not a twist. It's just a sudden surprise, and it's not well executed. And you're like, what? Where did that come from? Right? Or the twist happens and the reader's like, yeah, I know. I've seen that since like chapter 2. I don't know why it took you this long to reveal it. That's even more annoying, I think, than when it's so obvious to us, not because the author has told us, but just it's so obvious because of the way it's written, but the character still can't see it, Like that can be really annoying and it can be alienating for the reader. So, but it's not just a twist. It's any kind of clever gimmick. Like I wanted to write in a very dry, almost journalistic style of writing so that it didn't feel like my narrator was applying any of their emotion or feeling or opinions to it. They were just literally detailing what was happening. And I didn't do it well. The writing was flat and so whatever the gimmick is or the tactic or the technique that you're going for, you have to have a mastery of that in order for it to work. Let me see. There was another one. So grammar and punctuation, tenses. I don't know. My brain is dead. I don't recall. Central Park in fall, how you tore your dress. What a mess. Donkashane, darling, Donkashane. I only know that song from Ferris Bueller's Day Off. And yeah. Anyway, so let me just say, maybe I'll come up with some more of those things right there, but I don't know that I will. So the reason why I brought this up and why I was thinking about this topic today is because, like I said, I've made it more than halfway through. I would say I'm probably 2/3 of the way through editing this manuscript, and the manuscript is getting easier to edit. Obviously POV and point of view and showing versus telling. Those are also tells. One of the worst things that makes amateur writing feel amateur to me is when the writer writes a scene as if they're describing a scene they've seen in a movie. Or if the writer writes the scene the way they would tell it if they were telling a story. Writing is a very different medium from either movies or oral traditions. And it's really annoying to me when I'm reading a book and it feels like they're writing this as if it were a movie. And they're describing like the way things would move and act on a screen rather than in a person's imagination, where you can deal with far more intangible things. Whereas in a movie, you have to physically show the fire and you physically show the explosion or the bullets or whatever it is. And I can't even describe the difference between the two. A scene that is well crafted in a novel versus a scene that feels like it's a description of a scene in a movie. It's hard for me to describe the difference between those two, but it's there. It's the same with the way people tell stories. If the scene feels like it was written the way that person would say it out loud, that doesn't work. Those are, and I'm not saying that you can't do that and it work, but that would be one of those tactics, techniques that you try. And if you can if you have mastery over it, fantastic. But if you don't, it's going to ruin your shit. So I've made it through, I would say 2/3 of the way through this manuscript. Bella, shut the fuck up. Hey, baby. Oh, I know you're cute. And what it's bizarre that I can actually, it's almost like a map of my growth as a writer in 2017, 2018 when I was writing it. Because the issues that I had in chapter 1, I no longer have in chapter 30 or whatever chapter I'm on, which is good. It's just interesting as a writer to be able to see that very clearly, very plainly, and know. So my question now is, what do I not see about how I write now? Because the mistakes I made then, a lot of those mistakes are obvious. A lot of them are a bit harder to see, a bit less obvious, but they're still there. I can still identify them. But then there have to be others that I still don't see, even about my writing now. So that's kind of exciting to know that in another 3 or 4 years, I will be on a different level as a writer. It's daunting too, you know? But I guess that's kind of part of the fun of it. Maybe. What do you think? All right, that's all the news that is news across the nation. I'm going to shut up now because I'm fucking tired of talking. And I think I'm probably doing a photo shoot this afternoon. So peace out, home skillets. I hope you are all having a great day. It is Easter today, so happy Easter. Happy spring. Whatever. And yeah, take care of yourself. Like I always say, it's such an important thing. And it's actually a lot easier to take care of yourself than you might think. It just takes effort and intentionality. You should be intentional about taking care of you. So big love. If you're a writer and you're working on a project, good luck. Let me know how it's going. Peace. I don't know why I do that. I can't help myself. Very quickly, the Scarecrow Hunters at that time had gone from being a record of it in my dream journal. I know I've said all this shit before. Don't give me a hard time. Skip ahead. So